The silence that fell over the auditorium wasn't the usual kind. It was the quiet before a storm, the kind where even the air seems to hold its breath before everything changes forever. Marina Reyes watched the hundreds of faces before her, each bearing the same skeptical expression she'd seen countless times over the past 15 years. These were corporate executives, HR directors, diversity consultants, all waiting for yet another inclusion expert to take the stage and repeat tired cliches about equal opportunities. What they didn't know was that the 42-year-old black woman in a simple, off-the-rack blazer carried within her a silent revolution about to explode. She adjusted the microphone with hands that trembled imperceptibly, not from nervousness, but from a contained energy that pulsed in her veins like electricity. For a moment, her eyes lost themselves in the audience, and she saw not the faces present, but echoes of a past that had forged her like iron in the fire. 26 years earlier, the 16-year-old girl raced down the hallways of her public high school, tears burning her cheeks. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, her essay on the future I dream of, returned by her English teacher with a comment scrawled in red ink. Dreams need to be realistic. Perhaps you should focus on something more suitable for your profile. Marina had written about her desire to become a speaker, to use words as bridges to connect different worlds. She described in poetic detail how she imagined her voice echoing in grand auditoriums, inspiring people to see beyond their limitations. The teacher, a middle-aged white woman who had taught for decades, had seen in those words only the daydreams of a black teenager from the inner city. That afternoon, sitting in the back of the bus taking her home, Marina made a silent promise to herself. She would never again let anyone determine the size of her dreams. But life, as she would discover, has cruel ways of testing our promises. Present. Good afternoon, Marina began, her voice cutting through the air with a crystalline clarity that caused some attendees to straighten in their seats. My name is Marina Reyes, and for the next 40 minutes, I'm going to share something that might sound familiar, the story of a woman who spent most of her life being underestimated. A low murmur rippled through the auditorium. In the front row, Carlos Mendoza, CEO of the company that had hired Marina for this corporate diversity talk, discreetly checked his watch. He'd seen dozens of speakers like her, people who turned their personal experiences into a marketable product, selling cheap inspiration to executives who needed to meet inclusive event quotas. Marina caught the gesture and smiled inwardly. She knew this type of skepticism well. 15 years earlier, the conference room at the consulting firm, where Marina worked as an administrative assistant, smelled of stale coffee and male ambition. She sat in the corner, taking notes on the presentation her boss, Robert Miller, was giving to an important client. The topic was internal communication strategies for large corporations, precisely the area Marina had specialized in during the 6 years she'd spent earning her teaching degree at night while working during the day to pay her tuition. It's simple, Robert gestured with flair, using slides Marina had prepared the previous week. Effective communication isn't about what you say, but how you make people feel when you say it. Marina watched, fascinated, as he presented ideas she had developed and organized, never mentioning her contribution. It wasn't the first time. For the past 2 years, she had seen her insights transformed into brilliant presentations, her reports into successful business proposals, her strategies resulting in multi-million-dollar contracts, always signed by others. During the coffee break, while pouring water for the executives, Marina overheard a conversation that would change her perspective forever. Robert is brilliant, one of the clients said. Where does he come up with these revolutionary ideas? Natural talent, another replied. Those people are born with it. It's not something you learn in college. Marina felt the world spin. Those people. She looked at the room full of middle-aged white men, all wearing expensive suits and carrying leather briefcases. Then she looked at herself, the only black woman in the room, invisible in her administrative uniform. That night, in her small, cramped apartment in the East Side, Marina made a second promise: she would find a way to make her voice heard. Present. Do you know the difference between diversity and inclusion? Marina asked the audience, her voice gaining strength. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. A few nervous chuckles echoed through the audience. Carlos Mendoza frowned. There was something about this woman that bothered him, an intensity he couldn't quite place. Marina walked across the stage with confident strides, each movement calculated to command attention. For 15 years of my career, I was diversity. I was present, counted, a positive statistic in HR reports. But I was never asked to dance. 10 years earlier, the opportunity arose unexpectedly. Robert had fallen ill on the eve of a crucial presentation to the company's board, and Marina was called upon to replace him. It wasn't unusual. She knew the material better than anyone. After all, she had developed it. Just read the slides, the general manager instructed. No improvising, stick to the script. Marina nodded, but inside, a familiar flame began to glow. It was the same energy she'd felt at 16, when she wrote speeches in her notebook and recited them to her bathroom mirror. The boardroom was intimidating, a massive oval table, walls paneled in rich mahogany, portraits of distinguished former executives. 12 men in suits waited, some checking their phones, others flipping through documents. To them, Marina was just a temporary fill-in. She began by following the script, her voice initially low and restrained, but as she progressed through the presentation, something began to shift. The words on the slide about employee engagement reminded her of her own experience as an invisible employee. The topic of effective communication brought to the surface all the times her ideas had been appropriated by others. According to the data presented, Marina improvised, stepping away from the script. 73% of this company's employees feel disconnected from the corporate mission. But I'd like to pose a question. Is the problem the communication, or the lack of authenticity in that communication? The silence in the room shifted. The executives looked up from their phones. Marina felt her heart accelerate, but she continued, when we talk about engagement, we need to understand that people don't connect with polished slides or corporate jargon. They connect with truth, with vulnerability, with the feeling that their voices matter. She looked directly at the CEO, the man who had instructed her to stick to the script. What if, instead of just communicating to our employees, we started communicating with them? What followed was the most powerful presentation Marina had ever given. She spoke about inclusion not as an HR policy, but as a revolution in the way business is done. About diversity not as a legal obligation, but as a genuine competitive advantage. About communication not as the transmission of information, but as the building of human bridges. When she finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Then something unexpected happened. The chief marketing officer, a man known for his coldness, began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in, until the entire room was on its feet. That was extraordinary, the CEO said, approaching Marina after the meeting. How long have you worked here? 7 years. Marina replied, still processing what had just happened. And why has no one ever told me we have a talent like you in the company? The question hung in the air like a gunshot. Marina looked around, seeing in the faces of those present the same shock she herself felt. For a few minutes, she had been seen, truly seen, but the magic was short-lived. Present, after that presentation, Marina continued, her voice filling every corner of the auditorium. Do you think I got promoted? That I finally received the recognition I deserved? She paused dramatically, observing the faces in the audience. Some people leaned forward, genuinely curious. I was fired. A murmur of disbelief swept through the auditorium. Carlos Mendoza stopped checking his watch. 3 weeks after that presentation, I received a termination letter. Reason: administrative restructuring. Of course it was a lie. The truth is, I had done something unforgivable. I had used my own voice. Marina began to walk among the rows of the audience, making direct eye contact with some participants. Do you know what my first reaction was? Anger, indignation, the urge to sue, to scream, to make noise. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Honey, sometimes life pushes you out of the nest. You can spend all your time complaining about the fall, or you can learn to fly. 8 years earlier, the first few months after her dismissal were the hardest of Marina's life. Without a steady paycheck, she struggled to pay rent on her small apartment. She sent resumes to dozens of companies, but something strange happened whenever she reached the final interview. Whenever she was about to be hired, something went wrong. It was on a rainy afternoon, while waiting in a corporate reception for yet another interview she knew wouldn't go anywhere, that Marina had an epiphany. The receptionist, a younger black woman, whispered to her, "Are you the Marina Reyes who gave that presentation at Millennium Consulting?" Marina nodded, surprised. "My cousin works there. She told me about you. Said it was incredible, but that..." The young woman looked around before continuing. that Robert is spreading rumors that you have behavioral problems, that you're unstable, confrontational. Marina's world crumbled. That was it. It didn't matter how qualified she was. It didn't matter how much she prepared for the interviews. Robert, with his network of contacts and influence in the market, had taken it upon himself to destroy her reputation before she even had a chance to rebuild her career. He began, but his voice failed him. "Take your time," Marina said gently. "Just breathe and connect with that boy." Carlos closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there were tears. "I wanted to be a teacher," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I wanted to teach children, to make a difference in their lives. And what happened to that dream? My father said that teachers didn't make money, that I needed to be more ambitious, more practical. And do you believe you betrayed that boy?" The question hit Carlos like a punch in the stomach. He looked at Marina, seeing in her no longer a hired speaker, but a woman who had seen through all his professional masks. "Every day," he whispered. The auditorium was completely silent. Some people discreetly wiped away tears. "Carlos, you have 400 employees in this company, 400 daily opportunities to be the teacher you've always dreamed of being. The question is, are you willing to teach, or just to command?" 3 years earlier, success had arrived in an overwhelming way for Marina. Her company now occupied an entire floor of a commercial building in downtown Chicago. She had a team of 12 consultants and a client waiting list that stretched for months. But growth brought an unexpected dilemma. The bigger her company became, the further she felt from her original mission. One Thursday night, working late to prepare a proposal for an international client, Marina realized it had been 3 weeks since she'd done any direct work with people. Her schedule was filled with strategic meetings, business negotiations, financial analyses, all important, but nothing that fed her soul. That's when she made a decision that surprised her entire team. She went back to offering free workshops in public libraries. "But Marina," said her partner, worried, "this doesn't make business sense. You're at the peak of your career, why go back to basics?" "Because the basics are where the magic is," she replied. "When you forget where you came from, you lose the ability to get where you need to go." Going back to the free workshops was when I rediscovered my true calling," Marina said, her energy reaching a new level. "It wasn't about building a successful company. It was about awakening voices. It was about helping people reconnect with their most authentic selves." She paused, letting the silence build anticipation. "And it was at one of those workshops that I met Julia." Marina smiled, a smile filled with precious memories. Julia was 17, a public school student, the daughter of Bolivian immigrants. She showed up at the workshop with a worn notebook and a determination that reminded me of myself at 16. 2 years earlier, the workshop was being held in the library of a low-income neighborhood on the south side. Marina had arrived early to prepare the room when she saw a young woman sitting alone, writing intensely in a notebook. "Hi," Marina approached. "Are you here for the workshop?" The girl looked up, revealing a young face but with a maturity that surprised Marina. "Yes, I'm Julia. I read about you online," and she hesitated. "I need to learn to speak." "What do you mean?" "I have ideas, lots of ideas, about how to improve my school, about projects for the neighborhood, about everything. But every time I try to speak, people look at me and only see a poor girl, the daughter of immigrants, as if my words had no value." Marina felt her heart tighten. It was like looking into a mirror of time. "Julia, can I see your notebook?" The girl hesitated, then handed over the worn notebook. Marina flipped through the pages, finding brilliant ideas about urban sustainability, digital inclusion projects, proposals for school conflict mediation. It was the work of an exceptional mind. "This is extraordinary," Marina said, genuinely impressed. "Why haven't you presented these ideas yet? To whom? Who's going to listen to a girl like me?" "Julia, do you want to make a pact with me?" The young woman nodded. "For the next 6 months, I'm going to work with you individually. We're going to develop your presence, your communication, your confidence, and at the end, you're going to present one of your projects to an audience of 100 people. Deal?" Julia looked at Marina with a mixture of hope and terror. "What if I fail?" "Then we fail together. But what if we succeed?" Present. "Julia worked harder than any corporate client I've ever had," Marina continued, her voice vibrating with pride. She practiced presentations in the mirror, recorded videos of herself speaking, studied nonverbal communication. But most importantly, she learned to value her own perspective. Marina looked directly at Carlos, who was still visibly shaken by the previous conversation. 6 months later, Julia presented her school mediation project to an audience of educators, business people, and public officials. Do you know what happened? The anticipation in the auditorium was palpable. She received 3 full scholarships to private universities, a funding proposal for her social project, and an invitation to join the youth council of the city's education department. Spontaneous applause echoed through the auditorium. But the most important part of the story isn't Julia's success. It's what she told me at the end of that presentation. Marina paused, letting curiosity grow. She said, "Marina, today I understood that my voice has always been here. I just needed someone who believed it was worth being heard." A reverent silence filled the room, and it was at that moment that I understood my true mission in this world. It's not just about developing corporate communication or increasing employee engagement. It's about awakening people to the transformative power of their own voices. Marina walked back to the edge of the stage, making eye contact with different people in the audience. Each of you in this room has a Julia inside you, an authentic version that has been silenced over the years by systems, by people, by circumstances. A voice that carries unique ideas, valuable perspectives, creative solutions. She paused dramatically. The question I leave you with is, are you willing to unleash that voice? 1 year earlier, the invitation to speak at the National Corporate Diversity Conference came at a time when Marina was questioning the direction of her career. She had achieved recognition, financial stability, professional respect, but something still bothered her. For weeks she prepared a technical presentation on inclusion in the workplace, full of data, charts, and success stories. It was exactly what they expected from her. The night before the talk, alone in her hotel room, Marina stared at the slides on her laptop and felt a profound emptiness. There was no soul in that presentation, no truth. That's when she made a radical decision. She threw away the prepared presentation and decided to tell her story. The whole thing, unfiltered, unvarnished, without trying to please. "Present, this talk you're hearing today," Marina said, her voice thick with emotion, "isn't the talk I prepared for you." The original presentation was packed with data on the ROI of diversity inclusion metrics and frameworks for inclusive communication. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the auditorium. But last night, alone in my room, I asked myself, what's the point of talking about inclusion using a voice that isn't my own? What's the point of teaching authenticity while being inauthentic? Marina looked directly at Carlos, who was now watching her with a different intensity. "Carlos, can I ask you one more question?" He nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. "If you could go back in time and give advice to that boy who dreamed of being a teacher, what would you say?" Carlos took a deep breath, visibly wrestling with emotions. "I would say," his voice trembled, "I would tell him not to give up, to find a way to be a teacher, even if it wasn't in a traditional classroom." "And isn't that exactly what you're able to do now? Isn't that what we can all do?" Marina addressed the entire audience again. Real inclusion isn't about creating policies for the others. It's about recognizing that we've all at some point been the others. We all have aspects of our identity that have been marginalized, silenced, deemed inappropriate. She walked across the stage with renewed energy. When we create environments where all voices can be heard, we're not just being politically correct. We're unleashing a creative and human potential that can transform not only our companies but our society. Marina paused center stage, her presence commanding complete attention. Going back to the difference between diversity and inclusion, diversity is having different kinds of people in the room. Inclusion is making sure everyone feels safe to authentically be themselves. But there's a third level, which I call liberation. It's when people feel not only safe to be who they are, but empowered to become who they can be. The auditorium was completely captivated. And how do we get there? How do we create cultures of liberation? Marina paused, letting the question resonate. We start by acknowledging our own silenced voices. We start by identifying where, in our own lives, we've made ourselves smaller to fit into spaces that weren't made for us. We start by having the courage to be vulnerable enough to show our humanity. She looked at Carlos again. Inclusive leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. Marina felt the energy of the auditorium shifting. It was no longer the polite attention of employees following protocol. It was the eager silence of people recognizing their own stories being told. But I don't want to end this conversation talking only about corporate leadership, Marina said, her voice taking on a more intimate quality. I want to talk about something more fundamental, the power of recognizing our own story. 6 months earlier, Marina was organizing files in her office when she found an old folder, forgotten in a drawer. Inside, dozens of handwritten essays from when she was 16, her old dreams preserved in faded blue ink. She read each one, recognizing in the adolescent handwriting the same voice that now echoed in corporate auditoriums. The same thirst for connection, the same intuition about the transformative power of words, the same fierce determination masked by youthful sweetness. One essay in particular made her cry. The title was The Woman I Want to Be, and in it, 16-year-old Marina described in prophetic detail exactly who she had become. A woman who used words to liberate other people from their internal prisons. That afternoon, Marina made a call. "Julia, it's Marina. Can you meet me today?" 2 hours later, they were sitting in a cafe, the former teacher and the former student who had become a friend. "I found something I want to show you," Marina said, handing the old essay to Julia. The younger woman read in silence, her eyes widening with each paragraph. "Marina, this is incredible. You knew, since you were 16, exactly who you were going to become." "No, Julia. I knew who I wanted to become. The difference is that it took me 26 years to have the courage to be that person." Julia looked at Marina with a new intensity. "And why are you showing me this?" "Because today you're presenting your project to the city council. And I want you to understand something. That 17-year-old girl who showed up at my workshop with a worn-out notebook was already the person you are today. You didn't transform, you revealed yourself. Present. The most powerful revelation we can have in life," Marina told the audience, "isn't discovering who we can become, but recognizing who we always were." She walked slowly across the stage, letting each word find its place in the hearts of the listeners. Every time you feel uncomfortable in a professional situation, every time you feel you need to play a role to be accepted, every time you dim your shine so as not to bother, that's not professional growth, it's a betrayal of the soul. Marina stopped before the audience, her presence filling the entire space. "Carlos, can I ask you one last question?" He nodded, no longer surprised to be called upon. "If you could implement one change in this company starting tomorrow, a change that would honor that boy who wanted to be a teacher, what would it be?" Carlos fell silent for a long moment, thinking. When he spoke, his voice was firm and clear. "I would create mentorship programs. Each company leader would be responsible for genuinely developing a younger person, not just professionally, but as a human being, not to mold who they should be, but to help them discover who they already are." The auditorium erupted in spontaneous applause. Marina smiled, seeing in Carlos's eyes the recognition of his own transformation. "Just look at that," she said, when the applause subsided. "In 5 minutes, Carlos has just created a more powerful inclusion initiative than most companies manage to develop in years. And do you know why? Because it was born from an authentic place. It was born from his connection with his own story." Marina started walking again, her energy reaching the peak of the presentation. Real inclusion isn't an HR program. It's not a corporate policy. It's not a quota to be filled. Real inclusion is an act of courage. It's the courage to acknowledge that we all carry wounds of exclusion. We all know what it's like to be underestimated, silenced, made invisible. She paused, letting the silence create impact. And when we have the courage to honor those wounds, to transform them into bridges instead of walls, we create something revolutionary: environments where people don't just work but thrive. 3 months earlier, the email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was from a young woman named Camila, a business administration student at a private university, the daughter of a middle-class family who had made enormous sacrifices to pay her tuition. "Marina, I've watched your YouTube talks and deeply identified with them. I'm an intern at a multinational company, and every time I try to contribute in meetings, I feel my opinion doesn't carry weight because I'm just an intern. How can I develop presence and confidence so that my voice is heard?" Marina responded immediately, scheduling coffee with Camila. When they met, she saw in the young woman the same hunger for recognition she had felt decades before. "Camila, tell me, what was the last idea you had that could add value to the company?" The young woman hesitated, then talked about a process optimization proposal she had developed but never had the courage to present. Why didn't you present it? Because what if I'm wrong? What if everyone realizes I don't know anything? Marina smiled, recognizing the internal dialogue she had had with herself for years. Camila, can I tell you a secret? The difference between people who are heard and those who aren't isn't in what they know. It's in the confidence they have in the value of their perspective. But how do I develop that confidence? By starting to honor your own experience. You're not just an intern. You're an intelligent person with a unique perspective, observing the company with fresh eyes. That's valuable. That's powerful. Marina worked with Camila for 2 months, not just on communication techniques, but on recognizing her own worth. The result was transformative. The young woman not only presented her proposal, but was promoted to junior analyst 6 months ahead of schedule. Present. The story I just shared with you, Marina said, her voice echoing for the last time in the auditorium, isn't just my story. It's our collective story. It's the story of everyone who was once underestimated and found the strength to rise. She walked to the center of the stage, making eye contact with different people in the audience one last time. But there's a crucial difference between being a victim of circumstances and being the architect of one's own transformation. Victims wait for others to recognize their value. Architects create recognizable value. Marina paused one final time, letting her words find fertile ground in the hearts of her listeners. Today, when you leave this auditorium, you have a choice. You can return to your routines, your habitual roles, your comfortable silences, or you can decide that this is the moment to unleash the voice that has always been inside you waiting to be heard. She looked directly at Carlos one last time. The voice that resonates isn't the loudest. It isn't the most polite. It isn't the most polite. It isn't the most politically correct. The voice that resonates is the truest. It's the one that has the courage to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to be profoundly, irrevocably human. She gave a subtle bow. Thank you for letting me share my truth with you. Now go and share yours with the world. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, starting with Carlos in the front row, one person stood up, then another, and another. In a few moments, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding not just Marina, but something larger that had been awakened that afternoon. Marina observed the faces in front of her, seeing in them no longer an audience, but a community of people who had recognized their own stories in hers. People leaving not just inspired, but transformed. As the applause continued, Marina closed her eyes for a moment and felt the presence of the 16-year-old girl who had written about being a woman who would use words to liberate other people. 26 years later, that girl had kept her promise. Leaving the stage, Marina knew this wasn't just another presentation completed. It was the end of a cycle of silencing and the beginning of a new era of liberated voices, starting with her own. In the hallway, while packing up her materials, she received a message from Julia. I watched your talk via the company livestream. You did exactly what that teenager dreamed of doing. You used your voice to liberate other voices. I love you, my forever teacher. Marina smiled, putting her phone in her pocket. Outside, the Chicago sun shone brightly, illuminating a city full of voices waiting to be heard, and she knew her work, the work of a lifetime, was only just beginning. Because some voices, once liberated, echo forever, creating harmonies that transform the world one soul at a time.